Your voice, your opinion, your community. Fact TV, free speech protected.
Hello, and welcome to the Art of Being Human. You know, a lot of things happen to people that we just don't understand. And so I'm going to start off this morning with a story. There's no explanation of what happened, but it really did happen. I was introduced to a man several years ago who was in a wheelchair. And he acted like he had a stroke. He could barely talk. He was introduced to me, and he kind of lifted up his hand and acknowledged me. And so I talked to him a little bit. Then I visited with the family, and we had a visit, and then I left. I didn't find out until later about this man. He has a history. He was a businessman. He got up every morning. He put on his business suit. Everything was fine, you know, and he went to work, and he had his wife, and he talked with her and so forth. And then suddenly one day, after a few years of his career, he couldn't do it anymore. And his mind just stopped. And what happened was he was like a little old man that had a stroke. He couldn't talk. He couldn't walk. He was in a wheelchair, and they took care of him. And it was like he had a stroke, like he was very elderly with a stroke, barely able to move, and nothing happened. There was no evidence that he ever had a stroke. And there he was, like a little old man, just sitting there and staring and not doing anything, not walking, not talking. They had to take care of him. They had to feed him. And he was like that for several years. Then suddenly one day, he got up and he started getting dressed. They asked him what he was doing. I'm getting ready to go to work. And they had to explain to him, you don't have a job anymore. For about 5 years or so, you've been in a wheelchair, not able to talk, hardly able to move. What do you mean? It's time for me to go to work. His mind appeared to be perfectly normal. He tried to do all of his normal things, except he couldn't because it wasn't there anymore for him. He didn't understand why his wife looked about 5 or 10 years older. The last time he saw her, she was young. And so there was no explanation as to why he stopped to begin with. It stopped functioning to begin with, and why he started functioning again. No reasonable explanation. Nobody ever knew. Now, of course, he became normal. He didn't have his job anymore, but he did become normal, and he lived for several years, and his wife lived with him for several years as a perfectly normal human being. What happened? What happened to his brain to get him so he couldn't work and to get him so he was back to normal? It happened instantaneously. Instantaneously, he got up from his wheelchair and he started to get dressed because he had to go to work. He remembered working. He remembered absolutely nothing about being in a wheelchair for 5 or more years. Absolutely nothing. He couldn't remember it at all. So what happened to his brain? Nobody knows what happened to his brain, but it must have been terribly stressful for his wife to have him normal again after all these years of not being able to function. So sometimes things happen and we just don't understand it. Now, we have a lot of stress, and what I really want to go in today is the defense mechanisms. There are a group of it's called defense mechanisms or adjustment mechanisms. It's ways that we handle stress. We don't choose the way that we handle stress. Our bodies choose it for us. And say there are about 10 items and 10 things that we can do to handle stress in our lives. We all have stress. It's not unusual to have it, but how do we handle it? Now, the way that we handle it is through these defense mechanisms or through these adjustment mechanisms. They help us to interpret the world around us. They protect us from having too much stress, and it's basically a part of our personality as to how we look at things when we are stressed. So everyone uses them. They have a positive and negative aspect to them. Most of them are healthy, some of them are not healthy, and most people don't even know that they're using them. So I have here a list of 10 things. Now, if you read different authors, some come up with 9, some come up with 8, some come up with 11, but I have a list here about 10 ways that we handle stress when we have stress, and we know when we have it. And I've already mentioned about the inward aggression and the outward aggression and all of that kind of thing, but I just want to go into this today because everybody uses them. They have positive and negative effects, and we don't choose which one we're using, and sometimes we use more than one. Sometimes they're more negative, sometimes more positive, but this is the way, the traditional way, that the human being handles stress when they have the stress. Okay, the first one would be to work harder. And what is this? If I don't succeed in one thing, if I work harder at it, I'll be successful. I'm going to work harder and harder and harder to do the same kind of thing. And for example, I knew a college girl. She couldn't do college work, and she was a good friend, but she flunked out 3 times. Every time she flunked out, she decided she was going to go back and try it again and work harder, and that way she would be successful. But, you know, college work isn't for everybody. But she wanted to be like her friends. All of us in our friends were going to college. She wanted to go to college, too. So she kept working harder and harder and harder, and she kept flunking out. So sometimes this mechanism works, and sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then the tendency is you're going to try harder to make it work, because that's the way you're thinking. If I work hard enough, I will achieve this goal. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen. It didn't happen to her. So it may or it may not work. It may be successful, it may not be successful. If you continue not being successful, then you have to decide that that's not for you. Your body will choose it, but that's your traditional way of handling it. If I don't fail, I'll work harder, and I will not fail. I will be successful, except it doesn't always work. The second one is compensation. If you can't do one thing well, then switch to something else. This tends to be healthier. I will never be a basketball player. I will never be a tennis player. If I wanted to be a tennis player, I might sit there and I might bat balls all the time, and it may not work. So I decide I can't do tennis, maybe I can ski. Now, this is kind of automatic thinking. It's not like you plan and you choose, well, if I can't do one thing, I'll do this. But it turns out to be healthy, because if you find there's one thing you can't do, then you will try to do something else. And that's a healthy way of doing it. It tends to be healthy. Now, the third one is rationalization. I'm going to spell this word for you. rationalization, just the way it sounds. Rationalization, it is it sounds like an excuse for bad behavior. In other words, my dog ate the homework kind of thing. Rationalization is an explanation of why you are under the stress, why what you're trying doesn't work. It's like a mental thing where you explain to yourself, well, of course I couldn't do it. I couldn't pass this course because the teacher doesn't like me. I can't strive and succeed in this well because people don't like me. They don't understand what my talents are. All of this kind of thing. And so rationalization is, in a sense, it's a good excuse for bad behavior or lack of success, but it's not based on reality. And the person using this defense mechanism doesn't always know that they're using the defense mechanism. You know, we have traditional ways that we face people. We have traditional ways of explaining ourselves, whether good or bad, and we lean on that and we follow that, and we tend to keep doing that over and over and over again. And in many cases, we don't know we're doing it. You know, it's a rationalization. I have an explanation of why I can't play tennis. I have an explanation of why I can't pass a certain course. And to me, it makes sense. It sounds like legitimate reasoning. But to somebody else, it may sound like an excuse. Racialization, a good excuse for bad behavior or lack of success, but it's not based on reality. I shouldn't say bad behavior. If there are things that you are doing that you can't do, then you can't do it. You know, better to acknowledge that. I can't pass this course, I can't go to college, rather than say, well, you know, it's not my fault. The teacher doesn't like me, the teacher doesn't make things plain to me, and so therefore, that's the reason I'm failing. Now, the next part would be attention getting. Getting all of the attention that you can, whether it's good or whether it's bad. I know some people who want to be younger. So how do they do it? They act younger, they look younger, they use makeup, they dye their hair, and so what their stress is they want to be younger looking, younger acting, younger feeling, and they do that by acting in a certain way. There was a case of, this is the case that I was involved with, but there was a case of a person who wanted to be a little girl because that's what she got the most attention. So when she was older, she started acting like a little girl. And that doesn't work very well. It looks odd. It is odd. But that's what she did to get attention. The next one would be identification. Try to be like somebody that you like very much. It could be somebody that you know. It could be somebody that you don't know, but you have an admiration for them. You're kind of looking at them from afar. Or somebody that you admire for some reason. And so what you tend to do is to try to be like them. You might buy the same kind of car that they have. You might have the same kind of styling of your hair like they have. You might have anything that's like them. Now, this can be unconscious. You don't realize that you're doing it, but it can be even from a movie star. You like a certain movie star, so therefore you're going to act like them, you're going to be like them, you're going to dress like them, you're going to talk like them. And that's not healthy, but it happens. You need to find your own way. You need to be your own person and not try to copy somebody else. The next one, I don't think we'll get to all of them on this session, but we'll do as much as we can. And your identification, you try to be like somebody that you admire. You try to emulate them in all kinds of ways. One is projection, to project your weaknesses onto somebody else and project your personality onto somebody else. It's somebody else's problem, not mine. Yes, I flunked the course, but it's somebody else's problem. Yes, I have a problem, but it's really not my problem. It's somebody else's fault. And that you go through life projecting all your anxieties on somebody else. Now, repression is forced forgetting. We all do it. And forced forgetting is when you have a trauma in your life and you can't remember it anymore. You can't remember the trauma that caused you to be ill. The brain doesn't allow you to do so, because if it allows you to do so, then you have a real problem, because you have to face all of that anxiety. And repression is forced forgetting. And there's also dissociation. It has to do with your spacing out. Supposing you're driving and something's on your mind, and you know you have to take exit 3. Before you know it, you're at exit 5. You missed your exit. Why? Because you were daydreaming. You were thinking about something else. It was like you were in a counter mood. You're thinking about something, and it's taking the attention away from where you're supposed to have your attention, and you miss what you're doing. Now, there are serious forms of that, but I'm going to have to close it, I guess, because I don't have that much more time. I will continue with this next time when we have our next session and be able to go into these in more detail, and then we'll go over them, and you can possibly choose which one you use. So I'm going to close it for here. Thank you for watching.